The night was quiet on the far edge of the human colony, where the forests pressed close against the scattered cabins. Elias liked it that way. He had come to this place for silence, to live away from the noise of the city, away from the weight of people and their endless demands. His home was little more than a wooden shelter he had built with his own hands, standing near the tree line, where the wind smelled of pine and the stars hung brighter than anywhere else. He believed he was alone out here, except for the occasional animal that wandered close. That belief ended on the night he saw her. At first he thought it was only the underbrush moving. The light from his lamp stretched across the yard in uneven patches, and something shifted just beyond its reach. Elias squinted, setting down the piece of wood he had been carving. The movement came again, a shadow thin and careful, almost too careful for a wild animal. He stood, heart beating harder than he liked to admit. "Hello?" he called out, though he knew no one should be here. The colony was still miles away. His voice fell into the trees, unanswered. Then, slowly, she appeared. The figure stepped from behind the brush, small and trembling. She was not human, he saw that immediately. Her skin carried a faint, pale sheen that caught the lamplight in strange ways, and her large eyes, wider than any human's, glowed faintly with reflected starlight. She was young, perhaps the age of a child, though it was impossible to measure by human years. Elias froze, caught between fear and disbelief. An alien here, at the edge of his home. She looked just as afraid as he was. Her arms hugged close to her body, and every step she took toward the lamplight seemed to demand courage she wasn't sure she had. Her eyes never left him, as if waiting for him to attack or shout or run. But Elias only stood, breath tight, staring back. The truth became clear the longer he looked at her. She was thin, her form almost fragile. Her movements were weak, unsteady, and her eyes darted not only at him, but at the loaf of bread lying on his table just inside the open door. Hunger. That was what had brought her here. Hunger had forced her across the line of fear, straight into the territory of a man she did not know. Elias could have sent her away. He could have reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. He could have turned his back, convincing himself she wasn't his problem. But something in the way she swayed on her feet, something in the desperate glimmer of her eyes, struck deeper than caution. He moved slowly, careful not to startle her. With a steady hand, he picked up the bread from the table. She tensed, ready to flee, but he broke off a piece and held it out, arm extended into the night air. Her gaze flickered between his face and the bread. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, with a quick, almost animal-like dart forward, she snatched it from his hand. The bread disappeared into her mouth so fast it startled him. She chewed as though she hadn't eaten in days, crumbs falling to the ground. Elias watched in silence, his heartbeat softening from its frantic pace. When she finished, she looked at him again. Her lips parted as if trying to form a sound, but no words came. Instead, she pointed faintly at the bread still in his hand. He broke off another piece and offered it. This time, she took it more carefully, her eyes meeting his, longer. There was something in her gaze. Suspicion still, but mixed with gratitude, fragile and uncertain. The air between them felt heavy, as though a line had been crossed that could never be reversed. Elias had fed her. She had accepted. Trust, however, thin, had been born. She did not stay long. After eating, she stepped back into the shadows, never turning her eyes away from him until she disappeared behind the trees. Elias stood there for a long time, bread still in his hand, staring at the place where she had vanished. When he finally went inside, closing the door behind him, his thoughts refused to settle. The colony had warned of dangers beyond the border, whispered stories of alien wanderers and the risks of contact. But what he had seen tonight was no danger. It was desperation. A child, starving, alone, searching for kindness where none should exist. He set the bread down and sat heavily in his chair, rubbing a hand across his face. His world had changed in the space of a few minutes. He did not know her name. He did not know if she would come back. Yet he could not shake the image of her eyes, wide and uncertain, filled with both fear and hope. Elias knew one thing with a certainty that surprised him. If she returned, he would feed her again. And somewhere deep in the forest, the young alien girl paused, bread still warm in her hands, and glanced back at the cabin glowing softly against the night. For the first time in many nights, she felt a little less alone. Elias did not expect to see her again. He told himself that what happened the night before had been a chance encounter. Nothing more. The forest was wide, and she had probably wandered too close in desperation. Maybe she had found her way back, to her people. Or maybe she had simply vanished into the endless trees. That was what he tried to believe, though his eyes kept drifting toward the tree line the next day, searching for movement. By late afternoon, as the light began to thin into gold, he caught it again. A flicker of motion between the trees. His heart leapt before his mind had time to argue. He rose from his chair on the porch, holding his breath. The figure stepped out, slower this time, her small hands gripping a branch as though testing the air. It was her, the same alien girl from before. She looked at him carefully, less startled than yesterday, but still cautious, her body ready to flee at any sudden movement. Elias stayed where he was, trying to make himself less threatening. He raised a hand, in greeting, palm open. She blinked at the gesture, tilted her head, and then took a hesitant step forward. This time he had prepared. On the table beside him lay another loaf of bread, a small bowl of dried fruit, and a cup of water. When she came within the edge of the lamplight, he slowly pushed the food forward. Her eyes widened at the sight, and her thin frame trembled with eagerness. She moved closer, each step careful, until she stood only a few feet away. Elias didn't speak, knowing she would not understand. Instead, he pointed at the food, and then at her. The girl's gaze flickered to his face, searching for any trick, and then she reached forward. She took the bread first, biting into it with the same hunger as before, but this time she did not devour it all at once. She ate slower, watching him between bites. Her eyes were large, dark with flecks of silver that caught the light like tiny stars. They carried questions he could not answer. Why he was helping her, what he wanted in return. Elias only sat quietly, drinking his own water to show her it was safe. Slowly she copied him, lifting the cup with both hands and drinking carefully. When she finished, she let out a sound. It was soft, almost like a word, though Elias could not understand it. She tried again, her mouth forming strange syllables that echoed with a music unlike human speech. Elias shook his head gently, pointing to his chest. "Elias," he said slowly, tapping himself. She tilted her head, repeating the sound in her own way. As. The attempt was clumsy, but recognizable. Elias smiled despite himself. She pointed to her own chest then, speaking a word that sounded like a string of soft consonants, strange and beautiful. He could not repeat it perfectly, but he tried, and she gave a small, sudden laugh at his failure. It was the first real sound of joy he had heard from her. Something shifted then. The fear in her posture eased a little, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She reached out, pointing at the knife he had left on the table beside the half-carved wood. Elias lifted it slowly, showing her the wooden figure he had been shaping, a small bird with wings folded. He set the knife down and offered the carving to her. She took it with both hands, staring at it as though it were some precious thing. Her long fingers traced the smooth edges, and her eyes softened. For the first time, she sat down near him, still keeping a space between them but no longer hovering at the edge of escape. She studied him as she ate, as if trying to understand this human who showed her no threat. Elias did not press her with questions. He simply let the silence stretch, broken only by the sounds of chewing, the whisper of wind through the trees, and the occasional chirp of night insects. As the sky darkened, she looked toward the forest with hesitation. Elias could see the conflict in her expression. She did not want to leave, but something beyond the trees pulled her back. She stood, slowly, clutching the wooden bird against her chest. Her eyes met his one last time, and she said a word he could not understand. Then she vanished into the darkness as quietly as she had come. Elias sat there long after she disappeared, staring at the forest. A part of him wanted to follow, to see where she went, to make sure she was safe, but he knew that was not his choice. She had come on her own, and she would return only if she wished. All he could do was wait. Inside the forest, the young alien girl pressed the wooden bird close as she walked. She replayed the sounds of his name in her mind. Elias. A human who had fed her, a human who had given her something not just to eat but to hold. She felt torn between the world she came from and the strange warmth she found near his cabin. Elias, meanwhile, sat by the table and whispered into the night, "I'll be here." He did not know if she could hear him, but deep down, he had the sense that this was only the beginning of something far larger than either of them could yet understand. The third evening came with heavy clouds, the kind that turned the sky into a dull gray sheet. Elias had been restless all day, unable to focus on his carving or the small tasks he usually kept himself busy with. He kept glancing toward the forest, wondering if the girl would return again. The memory of her careful laugh and the way she held the wooden bird close stayed sharp in his mind. As the first drops of rain touched the earth, he caught sight of movement again. His chest tightened. She was there, stepping out from the shadows of the trees. But this time she wasn't alone. Elias froze where he stood on the porch. Beside her, towering over her small frame, was another figure, an adult. The resemblance was clear, though the differences were sharp. The woman was taller, her form lean but strong, her presence carrying weight like a blade drawn from a sheath. Her skin had the same pale sheen, though marked with faint scars, and her eyes glowed brighter, like silver lit from within. She walked, with a power that made the girl's steps seem fragile in comparison. The girl looked relieved when she saw Elias, but the mother did not. Her gaze landed on him like a storm. She moved closer, her hand resting on the girl's shoulder protectively, and spoke in a language Elias could not understand. The sound was firm, commanding, layered with warning. Elias raised his hand slightly, showing his palms, trying to show he meant no harm. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had not expected this. Feeding a hungry child was one thing, facing her mother was something else entirely. The girl tugged at her mother's arm, speaking quickly in broken words, mixing her alien tongue with the few human ones she had picked up. Elias caught only fragments. Safe, kind, Elias. She pointed at him, her voice urgent, almost pleading. The mother's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. She spoke again, sharper this time, and Elias had no doubt she was asking questions. Why had he fed her daughter? What did he want from her? Why had the girl returned here? The tension in her stance made it clear she expected danger. Elias took a careful step back, then pointed toward the table where food lay waiting just as it had the night before. He moved slowly, breaking the bread in half, then setting it down where they could see. He pointed at the food, then at the girl, then pressed a hand over his chest. Safe, he said softly, echoing the word she had used. Safe. The mother's eyes flicked to the bread, then back to him. Her hand tightened on the girl's shoulder. The girl, however, pulled forward, tugging against her mother's grip until she broke free. She darted to the table, grabbed the bread, and returned with it clutched in her arms. She looked up at her mother, her silver-flecked eyes pleading silently. The mother's face shifted, if only slightly. The anger in her expression softened into something heavier, worry, maybe even exhaustion. She studied Elias again as though measuring the truth of him. Elias stayed still, forcing his body to remain calm, though every instinct told him to be ready to run. For a long moment, the three stood locked in silence. The rain fell harder, pattering against the wooden roof of the cabin. The girl ate quietly, pressed close against her mother, but she kept looking at Elias with trust in her eyes. Finally, the mother spoke again, her tone lower, less sharp. She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving him, and pointed toward the forest. Then she pointed at him. The meaning was clear enough. She wanted answers. Elias shook his head slowly. "I don't understand," he said. He tapped his chest again. "Elias." Then he pointed at the girl, waiting. The girl whispered something. A string of soft sounds, her true name. Elias tried to repeat it, clumsy as before. The mother's eyes widened slightly at his attempt, though she quickly masked it. The girl spoke again, faster now, pointing at Elias, repeating, "Safe, kind." The words carried weight even if they were simple. Elias could see the mother's inner struggle written on her face. She did not trust him, not yet. But she trusted her daughter. Finally, the mother lowered her hand from the girl's shoulder. She did not step closer, but she no longer looked ready to strike. She gave Elias one last long stare, then turned, guiding the girl back toward the trees. The girl hesitated, looking back at him, the wooden bird still clutched in her hand. She lifted it slightly as though showing him she had not forgotten. Then the two vanished into the forest, swallowed by the curtain of rain. Elias stood in the doorway long after they were gone, soaked by the damp air, his thoughts tangled. He knew now that the girl was not alone, that her people were out there, and that her mother was watching him carefully. The encounter had left him shaken, but beneath the fear was something else, a strange sense of responsibility. He had crossed a line that could not be undone. Somewhere deep in the forest, the mother and daughter walked together. The child spoke, eagerly, her small voice carrying through the rain as she repeated the name she had learned, Elias. The mother said nothing, but her mind was restless. She had seen kindness in the human's actions, but kindness was a dangerous thing to trust. Still, she had also seen the way her daughter looked at him, and that more than anything unsettled her. Elias returned inside, staring at the untouched food still left on the table. He sat in silence, the storm outside echoing the storm of his thoughts. He had only meant to feed a hungry child. Now he realized he was standing at the edge of something far greater than he understood. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the ground damp and the air heavy with the smell of wet pine. Elias worked through his chores with slow movements, his thoughts stuck on the image of the girl and her mother disappearing into the forest. He replayed the moment again and again, the child's trust, the mother's suspicion, the way she had studied him as if weighing his very soul. He knew they might never return, yet something in his gut told him the story was not finished. For 2 days, nothing stirred near the trees. Elias tried to convince himself that this was for the best. He had offered food, nothing more. They owed him nothing. And yet when he sat at his table at night, the empty chair across from him seemed louder than the silence around it. On the 3rd evening, as the sun dipped low, the girl appeared once more. This time she did not step timidly from the forest. She ran forward, clutching the wooden bird in her hands, her silver-flecked eyes shining when she saw him. Elias felt a rush of relief stronger than he expected. He greeted her with a smile. But before he could move closer, the mother followed behind. Her presence was no less commanding than before. She carried herself like a warrior, alert, scanning every shadow, every movement. Yet Elias noticed something different. She no longer looked at him as if deciding whether to strike. Her eyes were hard, yes, but behind them was thought, not fury. She had come willingly this time, not dragged by her daughter's insistence. The girl hurried to the table where Elias had set out food again, bread, dried fruit, and a little broth he had cooked over the fire. She began eating quickly, her joy plain to see. The mother remained standing, her arms crossed, but she did not stop her daughter. Elias moved carefully, pouring a second cup of water, and set it near the edge of the table. He gestured toward it, looking at the mother. For a long moment she stood still, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she stepped forward and accepted it. She drank carefully, never breaking her gaze on him, as though daring him to show a hidden motive. When nothing happened, she set the cup down and spoke in her strange, flowing language. Elias could not understand the words, but he understood the tone, firm, steady, but less hostile than before. The girl tried to bridge the gap again, mixing human words with her own. She pointed at Elias, repeating the words she had learned. Safe, kind. Elias. Then she pointed at her mother, speaking a long string of sounds that Elias assumed was her name. He tried to repeat it, clumsy on his tongue, and the girl laughed, the same bright sound that had lifted the air before. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at the mother's lips, though it was gone in an instant. Elias decided to try something new. He picked up another piece of wood and began carving slowly, letting the small shavings fall to the floor. Both, mother and daughter, watched him. When the figure began to take shape, a small animal this time, the girl leaned closer, fascinated. Elias handed it to her when he was finished. She held it close, eyes wide with wonder. The mother's gaze softened again, just slightly at the sight of her daughter's joy. The fragile silence between them began to feel less dangerous. Elias sensed a shift, though it was delicate, like thin ice. He knew better than to speak too much, so he let the girl chatter in her mixed words and gestures, her excitement filling the space. The mother listened, her expression distant as if she were thinking of something far away. As the night grew darker, Elias lit his lamp. The soft glow stretched across the table, casting gentle shadows. The girl leaned her head against her mother's arm, her eyes growing heavy from food and warmth. The mother glanced at Elias then, her eyes steady, and spoke a single word in her language. She repeated it, slower, then pointed at herself. Elias understood. Her name. He tried to say it, carefully, this time. She nodded once, a sign that he had done well enough. It was a small bridge, but a bridge all the same. When it was time to leave, the girl protested, clutching her wooden bird and the new carving. She looked at Elias as if begging to stay longer. The mother knelt beside her, speaking softly, her hand gentle on the child's shoulder. Elias could not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. They could not remain yet. Not here. Not now. Still, before they left, the mother gave Elias one last look. It was no longer the look of a predator guarding her child. It was the look of someone who had begun to question old beliefs. They vanished into the forest again, leaving Elias alone with the sound of the night. But the silence felt different now. The distance between them had shrunk, if only by a step. Elias sat at his table, staring at the carvings he had yet to finish, and felt a strange warmth. Trust was being born, piece by piece, and though fragile, it was real. Far in the forest, the girl walked at her mother's side, still holding the carvings. She whispered the name she had learned again and again. Elias. Her mother did not stop. Her. She only walked in silence, her thoughts heavy, wondering how a human of all creatures could offer such gentleness. The days passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. Elias had grown used to the small figure appearing from the forest, her eyes bright, her laughter soft as she repeated his name. But now, the forest seemed empty again. The girl and her mother had not returned, and the silence pressed against him more with each night that fell. He tried to tell himself it was natural. They had their own lives, their own people, their own dangers. He was nothing to them but a stranger who had given food. Yet something inside him felt restless, a knot in his chest that refused to loosen. He had crossed a line without realizing it. He cared whether they returned. On the fourth night, his answer came. He heard them before he saw them. Voices in the dark, heavy boots striking against the earth, the sound of men who did not belong in his part of the forest. Elias quickly doused his lamp and crouched low, peering through the window. Soldiers. Human soldiers, their uniforms dark against the faint glow of the moon. They moved with purpose, their weapons ready, scanning the trees as if hunting something. Elias's heart sank. He did not need to ask what they were looking for. Moments later, he saw her, the girl, running from the shadows, her mother close behind. Their steps were quick, desperate, and the fear in the girl's wide eyes was unmistakable. The soldiers were closing in from both sides, shouting commands Elias couldn't make out. The aliens were being cornered, driven straight toward his cabin. Without thinking, Elias threw open his door. "Here," he whispered sharply, waving them inside. The girl sprinted to him, clutching her carvings against her chest, and slipped, past him into the cabin. The mother followed, her body tense, ready to fight if she had to. Elias shut the door quickly and pressed a finger to his lips. They understood. The girl hid in the corner. The mother stood at the window, and Elias positioned himself near the entrance, his pulse pounding. The soldiers arrived minutes later. Their fists hammered against the wood. "Open up. We're searching the area." Elias steadied his breath. He could feel the mother's eyes on him, sharp with warning. If he betrayed them now, she would know. If he let the soldiers in, everything would be over. He opened the door halfway, blocking the view inside. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm though his heart raced. The lead soldier narrowed his eyes. "Reports of alien strays near this sector. Dangerous. Have you seen anything unusual?" Elias forced a casual shrug. "I live out here alone. Haven't seen anything but deer." The soldier leaned closer, trying to look past him, but Elias stood firm. "You think they'd come here?" he added, with a hint of disbelief in his tone. "There's nothing here worth finding." The soldier hesitated. The rain-washed ground around the cabin left little sign of fresh tracks, and Elias's calm eyes gave away nothing. After a long moment, the soldier grunted. "Fine. Stay inside. If you see anything, report it immediately." The men moved on, their voices fading into the forest until only silence remained. Elias closed the door carefully, his hands trembling now that the danger had passed. The girl rushed to him first, her small hand grabbing his sleeve. Her silver-flecked eyes shone with something deeper than gratitude. Her mother followed slowly, her posture still tense, but her expression had changed. She looked at him with new weight, as though something inside her had shifted. "You," she began, her voice thick with her alien tongue. She placed a hand against her chest, then pointed at him. Though the words were not human, Elias understood. She was acknowledging what he had done. He had chosen to protect them when it would have been easier and safer to hand them over. Elias nodded. "Safe," he said softly, repeating the word the girl had used from the very beginning. The girl smiled, relief flooding her face. She pressed closer to him, as though she had found the one place in the world that would not betray her. The mother did not stop her this time. Instead, she lowered her gaze briefly, a gesture that felt almost like respect. They stayed hidden until the night deepened, the cabin filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of distant patrols. Elias gave them food again, though he had little left, and they ate quietly. The girl leaned against his arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The mother watched, her eyes full of thought. When the time came to leave, she hesitated at the door. She looked at Elias one last time, her silver eyes locking on his. She spoke a few words, slow and deliberate, then pressed a hand gently to her daughter's head. Elias didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning well enough. She was beginning to trust him, not just as a man who had fed her child, but as someone who would stand against his own people to protect them. As they slipped into the forest, Elias sat down heavily at his table. The weight of what he had done hit him. He had lied to soldiers, risked punishment, even death for beings he barely knew. And yet, deep down, he knew he would do it again without hesitation. For the girl, it was simple. She had found safety. For the mother, it was harder, but even she could not deny the truth any longer. The human had chosen to protect them, even when it cost him. And somewhere in the silence of that night, the fragile thread between them tightened into something stronger, something that would not break easily. The forest was quiet after the soldiers left, but the silence did not bring peace. Elias kept hearing their voices in his head, the sharp knock on his door, the way their eyes searched for something hidden. He had lied to them, risked himself, and now he knew they would return to search again. Yet when he thought of the girl's frightened face, he felt no regret. He would do it again. 2 nights passed without any sign of the mother and daughter. Elias told himself to be patient, but his chest felt heavy with worry. He wondered if they had gone deeper into the forest, far away from danger, or if something worse had happened. He tried to carve wood to calm himself, but the pieces splintered under his hand. He could not stop thinking of them. On the third night, he heard soft footsteps outside. His heart jumped. He moved to the door, opening it carefully, and there she was, the girl, standing in the lamplight with her wooden bird clutched tightly in her hands. Relief flooded him, but before he could speak, her mother stepped from the shadows. Something was different about her. The strength was still there, the proud way she carried herself, but her eyes were softer, heavier, filled with something Elias had not seen before, desperation. She guided the girl forward, but instead of standing in silence as she usually did, she lowered herself onto one knee in front of Elias. The gesture shocked him. She had never bowed, never shown weakness, never treated him as anything but a stranger. Now she looked up at him, her voice breaking with words he could not understand. She spoke quickly, almost pleading, her hands pressed against her chest, as if offering something unseen. The girl grabbed Elias's hand and held it tightly. She spoke the few human words she knew. "Stay. Here. With you." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady, full of hope. She looked at her mother, then at him, repeating the words again. "With you. Safe." Elias's breath caught. The meaning became clear. The mother was asking him to take her daughter. He looked at the woman in disbelief. How could she trust him with something so precious? He shook his head, pointing at her, then at the girl. "She belongs with you," he said softly, though he knew she could not understand the words. The mother shook her head firmly in return. She spoke again, slower this time, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. The tone was filled with pain, but also with certainty. Elias understood then. The mother believed her daughter would not survive with her. Perhaps the soldiers were too close. Perhaps the dangers of the forest were too great. Whatever the reason, she had chosen him, a human, to protect her child. The girl pressed closer to him, refusing to let go of his hand. Her small fingers wrapped tightly around his as if she feared he might push her away. Her mother's eyes glistened in the lamplight. She said one last word, slow and deliberate, and then she bowed her head. It was not the bow of a warrior, but of a mother surrendering her greatest treasure. Elias's chest tightened. He had not asked for this, had never imagined such a choice would be placed before him. Yet, looking at the girl's trembling smile, he knew he could not refuse. He nodded slowly, placing a hand over his heart. "I'll protect her," he whispered, though the words were more for himself than for them. The girl's face lit with relief. She leaned against him, her small frame warm and fragile. Her mother closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering strength, then rose to her feet. She stepped forward and placed a hand gently on Elias's shoulder. It was the first time she had touched him, and the gesture carried the weight of a silent promise. Then she leaned down, kissed her daughter's head, and whispered something in her own tongue. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let go of Elias. The mother straightened, her face set with determination. She looked at him one last time, silver eyes burning with unspoken words, then turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The girl trembled as she watched her go, but she did not chase after her. Instead, she buried her face against Elias's arm, holding the wooden bird close with her other hand. Elias wrapped an arm around her carefully, unsure at first, then firmly, as he felt her shaking. "You're safe," he murmured. "I promise." For a long time they sat together in silence, the cabin warm around them while the night outside stretched endless and cold. Elias's mind raced with questions, how he could possibly protect her, what the future would hold, whether the mother would ever return. But beneath all the fear was something stronger, resolve. The girl had chosen him. Her mother had trusted him. Now he was responsible for more than just himself. As the fire flickered low, the girl finally fell asleep against him, her hand still gripping his tightly. Elias looked down at her peaceful face, then at the door where her mother had vanished, into the night. He felt the weight of her absence pressing against him, but also the strength of the bond she had left behind. Whatever dangers came, whatever storms lay ahead, he would face them. Not because he had to, but because a child's trust had made him more than what he had been. The days that followed were unlike any Elias had known before. His cabin, once a place of silence, now carried the sound of small footsteps and soft laughter. The girl filled the empty spaces he had grown used to, her curious eyes touching everything, her hands holding tightly to the little wooden carvings he made for her each night. She tried to repeat human words more often now, sometimes failing, sometimes surprising him with clear sounds. "Elias," she said, almost perfectly, and her smile at his nod was brighter than the firelight itself. But with her presence came a heavy shadow. Elias knew the soldiers would not stop searching. The mother's decision to leave her daughter with him was not only born of trust, it was born of danger. Every knock at the door, every crunch of branches outside, sent his heart racing. He began to keep watch at night, sitting by the window with his rifle near, though he prayed he would never need to use it. The girl, however, seemed to believe that the cabin was a safe world of its own. She played with the carvings, lined them up neatly on the shelf, and sometimes fell asleep with them clutched in her arms. She trusted him completely, in a way that humbled Elias. Each time her hand slipped into his, he felt the weight of the promise he had made to her mother. One evening, while the girl sat at the table humming softly, Elias heard a sound outside. It was not the heavy boots of soldiers, but something softer, deliberate. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the dark forest. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. It was her mother. She looked thinner, wearier, but still carried the same sharp strength in her posture. For a long moment, she said nothing. Elias stepped forward, his breath caught, unsure if she had come to take her daughter back. But then she shook her head slowly, her eyes lowering in something like relief. The girl appeared behind him, gasping with joy. She ran to the doorway, calling out in her alien tongue, her words fast and full of excitement. Her mother knelt briefly, listening before her gaze rose to Elias again. She spoke carefully, her tone softer than he had ever heard before. He could not understand the words, but the meaning was written in her eyes. She had come not to take her daughter away, but to see that she was safe. Elias stepped aside, allowing her into the cabin. The girl pulled her mother toward the table, showing her the carvings, the food, the warmth. For the first time, the woman sat down in his home. She listened to her daughter's happy chatter, and though she spoke little, her face softened as she looked around. Later, when the girl fell asleep in the corner, the mother and Elias sat across from each other. The fire between them crackled softly. She spoke again, slow and deliberate, using both her language and the few human words she had learned from her daughter. It was broken, but Elias understood enough. She told him of her people, how they had been scattered, hunted, and forced into hiding. She told him of her own weakness, that she could not keep her daughter safe while always on the run. Then she looked at him, her eyes steady. She repeated one word she had learned from her daughter. "Safe." Elias nodded, his throat tight. "Safe," he promised again, pressing his hand against his chest. The mother studied him for a long moment, then gave a small bow of her head. It was not just gratitude, it was trust. She stood, placed a hand on her daughter's head, then rested her other hand lightly on Elias's shoulder. The touch carried all the meaning her words could not. "You are her protector now." Before dawn, she left again, vanishing into the trees. The girl stirred in her sleep, clutching her wooden bird, but did not wake. Elias stood at the doorway long. After the mother was gone, the sky turning pale above the forest. He felt the full weight of what had been placed upon him. Weeks turned into months. The soldiers came again and again, but Elias always sent them away with calm eyes and steady lies. The girl grew stronger, her laughter filling the cabin, her human words growing clearer each day. Sometimes she would point at the sky, whispering about her mother, and Elias would tell her softly, She'll return, she promised. Whether he believed it fully or not, he said it for her. And yet in quiet moments Elias wondered if her mother would ever come back, or if she had given her child to him forever. The thought was heavy, but not unwelcome, for the girl was no longer just a visitor. She was part of his life now, a bond forged by trust and choice. One night, as the fire flickered low, the girl curled against him and whispered a single word she had learned, a word that made his chest tighten with emotion. Family. Elias closed his eyes, his hand resting gently on her small shoulder. Outside, the forest stretched endless and dark, the stars watching silently above. The world was still dangerous, still uncertain, but within the wooden walls of his cabin, something stronger than fear had taken root. Kindness had bridged the distance between worlds. And now in this quiet corner of the galaxy, humanity was remembered not for its weapons, not for its wars, but for the simple power of compassion, the kind of strength that could keep a child safe when nothing else could. Elias opened his eyes and whispered back, "Family." And for the first time in years he knew he was no longer alone.